Hi, this is Whitney Kurtz-Ogilvie, and today we're going to talk about how to use source material effectively and appropriately. And part of the focus will be on avoiding accidental plagiarism, but that's really only part of the equation when using sources. So we're also going to talk about how to maximize the impact of the sources that we use and really make sure that it's enhancing our readers' understanding of the topic. So let's move on. So what is plagiarism? Well, plagiarism is essentially the act of using something that didn't originate in your own brain, someone else's words or even someone else's ideas without giving them proper credit. So it isn't just using somebody else's exact words, it's also using someone else's ideas and presenting them as your own. Now, this can be intentional, meaning malicious. You're passing someone else's paper off as your own. You are copying and pasting big chunks of someone else's work, either from someone else's paper or from the internet, passing them off as your own. You're hiring someone to write the paper for you, buying a paper. All of that is very much intentional plagiarism, and shame on you if you're doing that. But plagiarism can also be unintentional. It can be accidental, and this scares the heck out of people, but it's very true. And I would actually say, as a writing instructor, most of the plagiarism that I see, certainly in the graduate students that I work with, is unintentional. It's just people not understanding how to appropriately credit their sources. So this can be forgetting to cite a source, sticking too closely to an author's original wording when trying to paraphrase, what we call patchwriting, which we'll cover in more detail a little bit later. But basically, this is sort of doing a lot of quoting and paraphrasing and really not a lot of your own critical thinking. So essentially just presenting a bunch of other people's ideas and none of your own. But we'll get into that in more detail in a bit. So it can be intentional, it can be unintentional. And unintentional plagiarism is terrifying because you're not doing it on purpose, but at the same time, it's plagiarism and you can still suffer the consequences of it. So there's a wonderful online resource called Plagiarism 101, and it offers a guide to the various different types of plagiarism. And if you want, you can pause this video right now and take down this web address and check this out. So how do you avoid plagiarism? Well, there are a number of steps you can take. The first and probably most important step is to take good notes as you read. So you want to make sure that you are keeping careful track of authors, dates, publication information, page numbers, where you found everything and who wrote the sources that you're using. But also, you need to keep track in your notes of whether material is quoted, paraphrased, or your own thoughts about what you're reading. Now you can use whatever method you want to take notes. You can use index cards or a notebook that you use just for this purpose if you're one of the old school, I like to write in longhand folks like I am. Or you can have a method on your computer, but I would recommend coming up with a method and sticking to it, using the same method every time so that you always know exactly what you're looking at. Now, what I like to do is put word for word material, meaning quotes, in big, bold quotation marks to make sure that I'm not going to forget. If I'm writing down an exact quote, I'm going to know if I look at that 3 weeks later that that was an exact quote and that that wasn't something that I paraphrased or something I came up with on my own. So make sure when you're quoting that you note authors and page numbers, because a lot of the citation methods like APA, for example, want you to cite a page number when you're quoting directly. You also can indicate ideas from sources with an S and ideas that are your own. So you're taking notes as you're reading and something just occurs to you and it's your own original idea. You can indicate those with a letter M or with the word me or mine, whatever you want to do. You can use a star for stuff that's yours and, an asterisk for stuff that's someone else's, whatever method you want to use. But just make sure that you won't forget what is yours and what is theirs. It's very important. So note taking is a big part of the equation here because you can think you'll remember something weeks later, but more often than not, if you're like me, you're not gonna. Same goes for don't try to go back and put your citations in later. You want to cite as you write. Another good tip is if you photocopy something from a source, write down all the publication information on the first page, and that way you're not going to lose that. It's important to learn when to cite and how to cite sources properly. A lot of the courses that we teach in the graduate program at UK is in APA style. So if that's it, learn APA style. If it's AMA, learn AMA. Get a copy of the handbook or find a good online resource and really learn the basics, because there is software out there that will do your citations for you, but I have not found a program yet that can do it without making errors. And that's particularly true with APA style. It is just so complicated that software can't manage it. And so often when I find big errors in people's citations, they tell me, oh, I used EndNote or I used Perla. So you have to learn the basics. That's the best way to go. It's also crucial to learn to paraphrase appropriately, and we are going to talk a lot more about paraphrasing later in this workshop. So we'll put a pin in it for now, but paraphrasing properly is huge. Now this is what we call the citation tree, citation decision tree. And it's real simple. Basically, the first question is, did you think of it yourself? And if the answer is yes, then that's your own idea. You don't have to cite it. It's your own original idea. If the answer is no, I didn't think of it myself, then the next question is it common knowledge? If the answer to that is yes, it's common knowledge, you would know it if you didn't grow up under a rock, then you're usually good not to cite. If the answer is no, it is not common knowledge, then you have to cite. Now, of course, the obvious question that everyone wants to know is what qualifies as common knowledge, and that's a very good question. There is some advice out there that you may run across in some writer's handbooks and on some websites that I actually think is terrible advice. This advice says that if you can find a piece of information in 6 or more sources, then it's common knowledge. I think that's absurd, especially with writing on the graduate level, because a lot of you folks are in very specialized fields and you deal with very specialized information. And just because you can find something in 6 sources in your specialty does not make it common knowledge. Somebody even, if you're a nurse, let's say, and you're a cardiac nurse, that's your focus, there might be common knowledge to you, but somebody in a different specialty of nursing, even wouldn't have any idea what it was. So I think that's terrible advice. I think it's a judgment call. Something as obvious as, smoking is bad for you. That's common knowledge. Everybody knows that. So maybe if you were to say something as broad as that, you wouldn't need to cite. But if you're going to get into specific health risks, then I think you would have to cite. So I think it's one of those things where use your best judgment, but when in doubt, cite. So how do I avoid plagiarism? Part 2. So in addition to taking good notes and knowing when to cite, the most important thing is to avoid plagiarism by using your sources appropriately and effectively. So part of the equation with not plagiarizing is actually about thinking critically about what you read and really learning to engage with your sources and not just pick out a few quotes and plunk them down, but really think about what you're reading and how it relates to what you're writing about. Really get in there and get your hands dirty, and that's the part of the equation that we're going to talk about next. This is not easy. Okay, it takes practice to use sources well. It takes careful thought. It is about a lot more than picking out a few interesting sounding quotes and a few statistics to use. It is a lot deeper than that. Certainly at the graduate level, if you're getting your graduate degree, this is a key skill that you need to learn, because writing is a thinking process. It is a critical thinking process. And that applies not only to, your own ideas that you come up with, but how you engage with the ideas of other people as well, and how you synthesize those things. So keep this in mind when using sources. Don't let your source material drive the bus. Okay, and if I have any fellow Simpsons fans, that's Otto the bus driver from The Simpsons. So it's, your manuscript, your paper should be about your ideas, not other people's. That doesn't mean that you're not going to share the ideas of other people and you're not going to let those enhance your reader's understanding. But what should drive the bus is you. You're making a point, you're making an argument, you're trying to get a take-home message across, and that should be a message that you have come up with on your own, from reading all of these things, from learning all the things you've learned, from doing the research that you have. That should be the driving force. Your sources are there to support your ideas, to support your points, not make them for you. Okay, so let that sink in for a second. The golden rule here is that your ideas are what's driving the bus, not those of your source authors. So the primary focus is the point you want to make, and then the source material is there to support those points, to provide examples to illustrate those points, to develop those points, but not to make those points. So this approach ensures a deeper paper, a more interesting paper, and it also is an approach that is going to tend to prevent plagiarism as well. So here are some examples of what sources should do. We talked about what they shouldn't do. What they should do is support your ideas with evidence. So in other words, look, I'm not the only one who thinks this. In their article, blah, 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 Jones and Doe argued that, blah, blah, blah. So you're sort of bringing in some reinforcements to support a point that you're making, and that can strengthen your take-home message, strengthen your argument. So this is often where your statistics will come in, where your examples, the study done in 2014 found blah, blah, blah. So support is the first thing. Source material can also provide examples to illustrate your idea. And this is useful when you're dealing with complex or difficult ideas. I co-teach a course in nursing theory every fall, and some of those theories are fairly abstract and difficult to wrap your head around. And so examples can be terrific because they can show, rather than just tell, how those theories might be used in real practice. So examples are terrific, and sources can do that. They can illustrate how something is used or how something works. They can also help you to develop your idea more thoroughly, or to add a new dimension to it, a new perspective, a new angle. Here's how this person feels about it, or here's what this person has argued. So all of those things are what sources should do. What you must not do in writing is to string together a series of quotes or paraphrases from other sources and just kind of intersperse them with a few little sentences of your own here and there, and then let that stand as your paragraph or as your section or as your paper. That is what we call patchwriting. And it isn't writing. It's like making a quilt, which I think is why they call it patchwriting. In a quilt like this, the squares are your quotes and your paraphrases that you're getting from other sources, and then just the stitches there are your original sentences that people will usually toss in there to sort of introduce the source material or link it together. But there's not a lot of the author's original thought going on. It's just kind of like, well, I found this, 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 and this. So that again is called patchwriting. It is not what we want to do. So Rebecca Moore Howard coined that term. She's a science writer and writing instructor, and she argues that this often results from really not fully understanding what it is that we're reading and what we're writing about. And so if we don't fully understand what we're reading, it's really difficult to find new and interesting ways to discuss it. So I would agree with that as a writing teacher, that oftentimes when I see patch writing, it is in fact because the writer has not fully understood what they're reading or what they're writing about. They're not comfortable with the topic. And obviously, if you're starting from that point, if you're writing something and you're not really comfortable with the subject matter, then that's a problem. And that's a problem that needs to be rectified before you really get into writing a paper. So if you find yourself in that situation, the best thing to do is to talk to your instructor, your advisor, bounce ideas off of somebody, get some help rather than patch writing. And the problem with patch writing, of course, is that it doesn't create any new meaning. It doesn't create anything original. It's just a bunch of recycled ideas. And, certainly at the doctoral level, but really with anything that you're writing at any level, why write it if you're not creating something new and useful? The idea is to add to the discipline and to add to the conversation that's going on. So if you're not doing that, there's not a lot of point in writing. It also robs you of the chance to really engage with what you've read and use it to enhance your own understanding and your reader's understanding of your topic. Last but not least, the problem with patch writing is that it almost always results in a paper that's boring and often in a paper that's plagiarized. So obviously this is not something that we want to be doing. So when I say engaging with what you've read, what is it that I mean exactly? And I'm going to wrap this up for now because I can see that my 15 minutes for part 1 is almost up. So this is the end of part 1 of the video. We will pick up on this slide with part 2. So make sure to look at my channel, and part 2 should be right there for you to click on, and we'll continue in just a moment. Back to you after these messages.